Welcome. I'm so glad we're getting a chance to talk about this. You've been thinking a lot about self-leadership and narrative sovereignty, right? Well, what if I told you that one of the most powerful tools for that work could be programming? I know, it sounds a little strange, but stick with me. We're going to explore how the basic logic of code can be an incredible ally in crafting your own story. So yeah, let's dive right in.
First things first, let's get our heads in the right space. This quote from my book really gets to the heart of it. This isn't about you becoming a software engineer, not at all. The point here is to learn how to think with computation, and maybe even more importantly, to see it for what it is, a part of our culture. It's a tool for asking questions, a tool for inquiry, just like any good method from the humanities.
So with that in mind, we've got to reframe what we mean by programming. Let's just throw out that stereotype of some developer building these massive, complex systems. For our purposes, I want you to think of programming as a form of thinking out loud. It's more like sketching in a notebook, or brainstorming new ideas, or even just posing a question to the universe to see what comes back. It's a space for discovery, not for getting everything technically perfect on the first try.
Okay, so for our first section, we're jumping into Chapter 2, which is called Calculating. But don't worry, we're not going to get bogged down in math. We're going to decode these concepts through a lens that's much more familiar to you, the logic of myth and story.
All right, the first piece of the puzzle we need is something called a variable. The formal definition in the book is super simple. It's just a label or slot for a value. Really, just think of it as a named box that you can put a piece of information into. That's it.
Now, here's where it gets interesting. How do we translate that idea? Look at this. In Python, you might create a variable called hero_name. In the world of mythic logic, what is that? It's a story constant. It's the unchanging name of the hero, like Odysseus or Inanna. Same thing with a variable like quest item. In a story, that's the sacred object, the golden fleece, the holy grail. These variables are the fixed, reliable anchors of any good narrative.
So if variables are the nouns, the next piece is the verb. It's called an expression. The book defines it as a representation of some sort of operations to be performed. But let's cut through the jargon. An expression is just the action. It's what you do with all those variables you've set up.
And this really illustrates the dynamic part of any story, doesn't it? An expression in Python, like taking that hero name variable and adding the words is_journey to it, is exactly like a ritual action in a myth. It is the telling of the hero's journey. It's the process that combines those constants to actually create the story, to move the plot forward. This is where the magic happens.
You can start to see a pattern here, right? Let's build on it with our next big concept. We're going to move into Chapter 3 and take the simple idea of conditional logic. If this, then that, and we're going to reframe it as a really powerful tool for self-leadership.
In Python, the if statement is incredibly straightforward. It's basically a gatekeeper. All it does is check if a specific condition is true. The book uses a simple example. If word equals please. The program will only respond if the word is exactly please. If it's not, nothing happens. It's a really simple but incredibly powerful rule for making a decision.
Okay, so here's the leap. Here's the crucial point. You can use this exact same logic to design intentional systems for yourself. Think about it like programming a personal ritual. Step 1, you set the condition. If the input I'm feeling is fear. Step 2, then my system will automatically respond with a predefined courage-based action. And you can even add an else condition. So if the input is not fear, then the system responds with something else, like a reflection prompt. You are literally designing a responsive, sovereign system for your own inner world.
And that brings us to a really practical, modern application. How does all this formal logic, the variables, the conditionals, translate from a Python script to writing powerful prompts in a tool like an AI studio? Well, the connection is actually incredibly direct.
So let's look at what most people do. They write a simple, unprogrammed prompt, something like, write me a professional bio. And, it's fine, it'll work, but it's not very intentional, is it? You're basically handing over all your creative control to the AI's default settings. You'll get a valid output, sure, but it won't necessarily be your output. Now look at this. This is completely different. By embedding programming logic right into the system instruction, you take command. First, you define the AI's role. You are a narrative strategist. You're giving it a purpose. Then you create a variable, username. And most importantly, you use that conditional logic. If the user provides a standard bio, then you will rewrite it to emphasize themes of sovereignty,
Do you see the difference? You're no longer just asking a question. You are directing. You're ensuring the output is not just valid, but deeply intentional.
Okay, so this is where you get to put it all into practice. Let's talk about your creative leap. I want to give you a concrete exercise you can do to turn all this theory into a real, tangible piece of your own sovereign narrative.
So here's a little free project for you, a sketch. Start with your standard professional bio, the one you'd put on LinkedIn. Then write a system instruction for an AI using conditional logic. The logic could be something like this. If my bio mentions a standard skill like management, then I want you to reframe it as an act of self-leadership or narrative sovereignty. The whole goal here is to use this logic to transform your bio from just a boring list of tasks into a powerful statement of purpose.
And to help you organize all these thoughts, here are the key takeaways. Think of this as a guide for your notebook on how to use formal logic as a humanistic tool. First, remember creative computing. A program is a creative act. Second, always distinguish between an intentional versus valid output. Third, embrace the power of the sketch. Don't be afraid to experiment. And finally, keep thinking about self-leadership systems and how you can use simple if-then logic to model your own response patterns.
So look at what we've done. You've seen how variables can act as the constants in a story, how expressions are the ritual actions that drive the plot, and how simple conditional logic can become a framework for your own self-sovereignty. You are no longer just a passive user of these systems. You now have the fundamental logic of creation right at your fingertips. So the only question left to ask is, what sovereign narrative will you command?